without further ado, I'll kick things off to the presenters.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm Joseph Padano. I'm the EVP at Evolve IP, all things cloud engineering, and happy to have you guys here. And I'll hand it over to Corinne.
My name is Corinne Bissett. I'm a technologist over at Veeam Software, and I specialize in the Microsoft 365 suite. And I think you kick us off with the agenda, Joe.
Yep. So, thank you guys for attending, and want to give you a brief overview of some of the topics that we're going to speak about here. And obviously, we want this to be as interactive as possible. We have Scott Arnold on our team who will be monitoring the chat channel. So if you have any questions, that are relevant to the content, we'll pause during the slide and address the question. Otherwise, if it's something else, we can answer it at the end, Q&A. But we're basically going to talk about ransomware. Obviously, it's becoming more and more prevalent in our daily lives, unfortunately. Talk about some best practices that Veeam has so eloquently pulled together from their support team. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our desktop offering, our DAS, Desktop as a Service. And then we'll jump into 7 reasons why you need Microsoft 365 backup through Veeam. And then if we have some time, Corinne can jump into a demo. We also want to save time for a Q&A. So thank you all. And
Scott, this isn't the first time we've done this presentation, actually. We did this presentation a few months ago, and it was such a great interaction. And the feedback that we got from this presentation is something that we took from that presentation and put into this, but not only put into this, but we put into a white paper we'll be releasing at the end of this webinar that we worked on collaboratively, and kind of giving a tease to that. So very much stick around, wait for that, and we'll be able to give a link to that at the end here. Takeaway.
So I highlighted this a little bit, and this is basically staggeringware, right? Basically, the ransomware industry, if it was a standalone economy, would be the 3rd largest economy in the world, right? So if we sit here and we go, whatever, this hasn't happened to me, this isn't going to happen to me, I'm too small, right? Honestly, I was thinking about some talking points on this yesterday. And, this feels like deja vu all over again, right? 20 years ago, right? Spam, or, 20 to 10 years ago, it's still a big deal now. But back then, spam was a huge thing, right? Before the Canned Spam Act. And the entire point of spam was, it didn't matter if you sent out 100,000 emails, 10,000 emails, 5,000 emails. You only needed one person to respond to it to pay it off. And unfortunately, literally, this has now evolved into being more, no pun intended, has been, more impactful to your business, right? When you can't get to all of your data, right? When you are locked out of your most critical applications, it's now big business. Obviously, things like Bitcoin and all of those have obviously made it easier and less trackable. So the entire point here is, this is big business for a lot of nefarious actors. Just to give you guys some numbers, it's real. It happens every day. We always say it's not if, it's when, right? This is going to happen to a business that doesn't take the proper steps, and that's some of the things that we want to highlight to help you guys with. But definitely don't want to leave the FUD behind.
I mean, they even have service providers out there providing ransomware as a service for people. So this has become an entire hierarchy of business. Yep. This is cybercrime as a business out there with a complete hierarchy. And I think you have some details over here about where you guys serve in your global scale and your reach. Yep.
So if you go to the next slide, Sarah. So Evolve IP is a global service provider. We have services within 45 different countries, over 500,000 endpoints. We do a plethora of different products centered around communications and what I'll call the outsourced IT space, or the compute or cloud industry. 24/7 support with, we're now over 15 years in the business, and lots and lots and lots of talented people on staff to help, from everything from Microsoft, Cisco, Veeam, and others. So we'll talk a little bit more when we jump into the DAS on some of our specific capabilities, but just to give you an idea who is Evolve IP. So we are very diverse in the customers and the lines of business that they're in. Here's just our logo quilt that shows everything from professional services, insurance, legal, healthcare. We have a very, very strong compliance program that includes SOC, PCI, High Trust, NIST 800-171. So it allows us to really dive deep on a lot of different verticals. And here's some of the companies that trust on Evolve IP to run some of their core communications and IT needs.
And here's a kind of overarching view of Veeam as a platform. I really like this slide just because a lot of people that have known Veeam for a long time know us as a virtualization platform for VMware. But we've since expanded across cloud, software as a service, unstructured and structured data types, physical and containerized infrastructures. So we support completely across the board, and we're able to adopt into our service providers and use our service providers to then go across all of those different hardware types. So you're able to then protect yourself on many different layers and not worry about having a single points of failure in your infrastructure. And that's what's really going to bring us into our next slide here and diving into ransomware protection and best practices. Everyone's going to have opinions on the matter, but most of us can agree on very basic sets of rules. And the first set of rules is really this first one here in this first slide, which is the 3-2-1. And many of us are very familiar with this, which is going to be at least 3 copies of your data on at least 2 different media types, and one of those needs to be off-site. We've taken this rule and we've expanded this beyond just the basic principle by giving an additional copy of those need to either be offline or air-gapped, because if you can access the data, there's going to be a way to alter that data. And you also need to have 0 errors in testing of that backup. So you need to test to make sure that you can recover it, and you can recover in the time and necessary to then get your business back up and running. So a sense of business continuity in your backup recovery testing. And this is what I've kind of deemed as the backup zip code, because we've kind of expanded beyond that. I get kind of funny looks when I go over to Europe and say the same thing, but here in the States, we kind of all collectively understand, yeah, okay, haha, and we move on. And the next slide here, we look at the odds that Joe was kind of going at. It's not really a matter of if I'm going to be attacked. And I've had a couple presentations I've already had to do today, and we had a really deep discussion on my conversation earlier is, oh, do we really need to back up? And it's specifically when we're talking about cloud entities, because people argue back and forth all day long, and it'll come down to how important is that data to you, because it's not really a matter is if it's going to happen, and even if it never happened, what if it did? What are you going to lose? What type of intellectual property are you going to be in compliance violation? Is it worth you losing that data? And if that one person that's able to get through and you lose a fraction of your data, is that going to impact your business reputation? Are you going to lose customers? Are you going to be able to recover if that happens? There's a statistic I read from 2020 to 2022. It went up 50%, which was 6% to 9%, which is almost 1 in 10 companies that had a ransomware attack had a change in upper management. You want to know what that means? A resume generating event happened in their upper management due to a ransomware attack because they weren't prepared for that type of situation. So you need to be aware, because these are going to happen, and when they do, they're going to be devastating if you haven't prepared for that. The next slide here. Ransomware, so secure backup is your last line of defense. Joe's going to go over some of the other things that they have available to help get seamless recovery and instances to have machines up available. But having a secure backup is a way for you to ensure that your backup is going to be fine once it comes up. Well, so you do scans and testing instead of getting it back up immediately. You're ensuring it's not still infected and you're not reinfecting that environment. The next slide here is something that we call our trusted immutability platform. And my managers actually pseudo named this the ultra resilient ultra immutability with the immutability magic, where you have multiple lines of immutability, and meaning you have a lock on your on-premises environment. So you're locking each of these lines of data as they go along, because if you're not locking your first copy of data and it gets altered before you go ahead and send it on to your other trusted platforms, you might as well be giving the keys away to start with, because it could be altered before it's getting saved to begin with. And now you could argue if production's getting altered to begin with, we're always talking about layers and you keep going within the Schrodinger's box and worrying about this. But when it comes to backups, you want to make sure if you can have an immutable copy all the way along the line of your backups. And that's a hardened Linux repository, a hardened object repository, anything that has a storage object lock, storage snapshot lock on an on-premises type of primary storage. Sending it off to a capacity tier that has something like an object lock on it or a tape that you have a rotating media on will do a sufficient job for you. And if you do need to do clouds, you can even tier that off to a colder type of storage, like an S3 Glacier in an archival state. Anything to add in there?
Yeah, I mean the only thing to keep in mind here is we have seen vectors of some attacks where perpetrators will get in and try to figure out what your retention is, make a change, so that way even after your retention rolls off. So while immutability definitely keeps what I'll call a 0 day or a current day attack, gets you data, you also, as Corinne pointed out in the previous slide, right? This is definitely the last line of defense, but it's not the only line of defense. So I wish that there was a silver bullet, but unfortunately, that's why it's called defense in depth. But this is definitely a phenomenal. You're talking about greater than a 90% recovery rate here. Based on immutability. But there are some things that get around immutability. Like if everybody knows your 30 days of backups, right? They'll change something and then they'll wait for 31 days and then launch their scale attack or ransomware or whatever. So that way, when you go back to it, doesn't matter. They can still get in. So things to think about, but this is a great start, and we've seen some tremendous success for it. Even just being able to offload to different tiers. And that was one of the things I wanted to bring up on the capability slide with Veeam. Like, we've been a Veeam partner for a very long time, and we are very proud to be a partner of them, given how much they have advanced in the technology and what they're able to do, from simple things like Cloud Connect and being able to replicate repositories, now to being able to use different tiers here with different security parameters. Right. And plus they have other things that are coming down the pike that are going to make DR, so much easier and better. And, as a service provider, we love vendors that just continue to outkick the coverage and allow us to continue to mature our product offering and deliver that to our customers.
Some great input. So this next section, we're shifting gears a little. We're going into some advice that we gathered from support. Here at Veeam, we actually have something called our Severity 1 support, which all they do is, I've called in, I've been hit by ransomware, or I've lost file, I've had some type of data loss in production where I can't get data back or I need help getting data back. I'm in disaster mode, help. These are some of the advice or something that they've run into that if the customer had done this, they would have been okay, but may not have been if they hadn't. The first one is having the ultra resilient versions copy. So what we just covered, having multiple layers of resiliency along that line, not just that one immutable copy, because if it can get altered somewhere along that line, it's probably going to get altered along that line. Ransomware people or cybersecurity people that are trying to attack you, they understand that backups are saving you from having to pay them. So they are explicitly attacking every weak point that they can find. And it could be a non-best practice configuration. You not following best practice to do these immutable copies of the data, they know how to find it and exploit it. So they'll go in and check to say, oh, found it, they're not doing that, and they'll go ahead and wipe that out and wait, just like Joe said, because they can be patient as long as they're not detected and they're not doing anything really sneaky other than pushing out your retention, and then time bomb, you're done. You can't get any of your copies back, and you don't have that ultra resilient copy down the line. Game over. The next one is having encrypted backups. So the only thing I think scarier than getting encrypted is actually what I call exfiltration of your data, which has been coined Robinhood ransomware. So what they'll do is they'll sneakily get into your environment and they'll exfiltrate your data, and then they'll say, hey, so guess what? I have all of these files, and if you don't pay me, I'm going to release these out to the public. How do you feel about all of this private data from your customers, XYZ, money lists, your internal employee information being released to the public? Depending on your institution, that could shut you down the next day. It could lose government contracts. We saw what this has actually done to private institutions and expose, quite frankly, some dirty laundry in some of those institutions. But it is very, very bad. So if you're not encrypting those backups, but then on the flip side, if you have encrypted those backups and you've lost the password, not being able to recover those backups because your backup software got wiped out and you don't know the password, you do need to keep those passwords in a safe place to be able to recover that data. So you do need to do encryption, but you do need to have a password handling policy, even if it means putting it on a piece of paper, putting it inside of like a bank box somewhere if someone has to walk down the road to go get it back out for you. Next thing is separation of account permissions. Domain admin /all is not a solution /all. Local accounts are not a solution to all, because you're going to end up creating something easy for everyone to get into. You need to figure out a solution to the accounts. It could be doing a maybe Microsoft login pass through where you have to use multi-factor authentication for certain kinds of accounts. Maybe you have a federation system set up. However you need to do that, maybe your backup accounts are all local accounts, but your infrastructure accounts that could be compromised by user daily login or domain accounts. That way you have that, user separation. The next piece of advice here is please test your backups. We have software that is called a Sure Backup software. It allows you to test daily if you want. Basic procedures. It will power on in a virtual environment and it'll post a Delta file of your machine to the host, log in through a virtual switch, test the login, test a port, test a ping, test a script that you've configured yourself, test a pipe within that script yourself, and then if it passes or fails, give a test back and an antivirus run. Say you have whatever you run in production and you have a second antivirus that you run in your own that tests a week later all of these backups. You can do that to make sure you're not missing 0 days that happened a week before. This is something that you can run within your environment and you should be running within your environment, plus you're getting your testing out of the way. We also have our orchestrator product, which allows you to get customized reports for how long does this take to boot up. So, if you do run to a disaster recovery situation, you're going to be prepared.
What was that first name of that software, Corinne?
The Sure Backup?
A Sure Backup?
Yeah, Sure Backup is the one inside of backup and replication.
Great, thank you.
Yep. The second thing here is the disaster recovery site. And actually, I'm going to let you take this one over because you guys have a lot of solutions that allow this to be possible pretty readily.
Yeah, and like I said, Veeam has been obviously grew up in the backup and backup and repository world, and now with some of their latest releases is starting to work into the DR side of it. And obviously Evolve IP is as part of our managed IT offering, big Veeam shop on the backup side. We also do DR, which allows customers to sort of cut down on that time for planning or remote sites and things of that nature. But the hardest part with the DR is just like testing your backups, right? There's we have a lot of prospects and customers that barely have time to set up the DR, let alone test it once every 6 months, at least once a year, right? Because that's the hardest part about this is break glass now. Most customers aren't ready for that event. But at least from a technology standpoint, we have a lot of that offering. But the biggest thing that you need to be concerned about is how do I carve out the time, the training, the mops, the readiness to be able to break that glass.
Perfect. And if you haven't heard this on at least, a half a dozen webinars since 2020, you've been on the wrong webinars. Use MFA whenever humanly possible. It is not a catch-all, but it does fairly all right. Now, I did just have a couple weeks ago, I'm sitting with a friend and he's regaling his last week to me where he had a user, and this user is blindly accepting these authentications through his phone, and the authentications are for the multi-factor authentications. Train your users how to use the multi-factor authentication. I almost want to put training on the same slide because training belongs here. It's not advice from support, that is just wholehearted advice from me, but train them how to use multi-factor authentication and don't accept it unless they are 100% sure it's them sitting in front of their computer, and then it makes it more conducive on using it, but use it whenever possible. Also use
and in the
single
industry today, if you have cybersecurity insurance from a legitimate carrier, they're requiring it anyway. So honestly, there should be no call into support anytime soon that where MFA is not enabled. Like it's a low hanging fruit.
And try to choose a multi-factor authentication service that allows you to aggregate single sign-on to as many of your corporate applications as possible. Prevent password sprawl. First of all, it's going to save you 100 password reset phone calls on your service desk. Second of all, you can make a single sign-on page to move those all from, and you're going to have all multi-factor authentication, the same thing, and then you're going to have less insecure passwords from people going the same password that doesn't change across these 20 different applications. It seems counterintuitive, but single sign-on passwords do help your environment when paired with other multi-factor authentication scenarios. And of course, you need to plan for business continuity. Business continuity means you need to plan what needs to come back up first in order to get business back up and running. You may not need to have 3 domain controllers back online in order to have people to sign on to their machines. 1 domain controller, your SQL server, and the business application might be enough to start limping along in this type of scenario, but you can test and see where your stress is in order to start. You want to get business up and running and find the business critical applications.
Yep, and that's some of the planning that we go through, right? Whether it's a tier structure, right? Tiers 0 through 3. I always say, tier 0 is always on, right? Tier 1, get me as soon as possible, and so forth from a timing perspective. But with technology the way it is today, companies like Veeam are making it more straightforward. I won't say easy, we're not there yet, but more straightforward for us to hit a button and we can literally restore more machines than you can log into. But the other thing is to test it out, right? Everybody knows that SQL can't come up until Active Directory is up right? So, there's obviously going to be an order of operations for things. And again, that goes back to testing it and making sure you have a plan. Because the technology is going to continue to far outpace your capabilities to sort of bring your business back up on its feet.
Everything definitely comes at a cost and a conversation. So we are about halfway. I do want to remind everyone that we encourage asking us questions. Joe and I have seen a lot of funny situations when it comes to environments and have some experience that we're more than happy to share and answer those types of questions as we go along through this presentation. And I think our next section is talking about your desktop as a service.
So I talked a little bit about Evolve IP and sort of some of the services that we bring to bear, and this is one of our, what I think, most exciting products that we're offering today, and it really goes into the theme of sort of making it easier to operate your business, right? If you're a 100-user company, right, you have 100 typically laptops out there that you have 100 different problems for, and that sort of compounds itself into many other problems about data security. Where's my data sitting? Where are people accessing it from? If somebody steals a physical device and things of that nature. And what we're trying to do at Evolve is just sort of make it a lot easier for you to operate your business. And part of that is centralizing into services within the cloud. Obviously, Veeam is a big part of what we're talking about today, but we take it even one step higher, that not only do we want to protect your data, but we also want to protect your business. And some of that is DR, but some of that is also making it easier and more secure for you to operate your business. And that's where desktop as a service comes in. It's basically a cloud-based desktop that replaces all of your physical devices, deployment and data. Obviously, you still need a physical device, but now you can literally use Chromebooks or a web browser or a kiosk and things of thin clients, reformat machines and only put the DAS client on it. And what that now does is it allows you to centralize everything from both your compute resources, but specifically to our message today, it makes it a lot easier to apply security policy when all of your IT resources are in one or two locations. Obviously, we can do this across many availability zones across the US and across the globe. But again, it goes into the theme of, there's better ways to protect yourself. And some of this, again, goes back to the defense in depth. When all of your data is in a very secure cloud that is under stringent compliance regulations that we hold ourselves to, makes your life a little easier. Obviously, it doesn't make all your problems go away. But, when we talk about defense in depth, right, firewall, IDS, things like, web security, email security, backup, DR, right? All the other things that we're touching on, it allows it so much easier, right? Imagine what it would take to install an agent, right? Veeam makes a physical agent that you can back up. Imagine trying to get all 100 of your users to push out that agent, make sure that they're backing up every night, that you have 100 different copies of 100 different stuff of things working. Now this allows you to centralize your business, manage it from one or two locations, deploy GPOs and things of that nature. These desktops are always on, always available. It just makes it so much easier to run your business and solve for some of the higher level problems that Corinne highlighted from a data protection standpoint. Next slides here. So obviously I talked about this, but I love this quote on the right. Right, DAS is a VDI, which is a virtual desktop infrastructure. That's someone else's problem, right? There's a lot of problems in IT today, and we love taking them at Evolve IP. We love taking them off the table. So to give you a robust, infrastructure, and really the biggest message here is we love freeing up your internal IT resources to do other things, right? You have custom applications, you have unique user experiences, right? You have other things that Evolve IP might not have knowledge of. That's what you use your IT team. Not, I call it blinky light syndrome, right? You shouldn't be worried about whether your CEO's laptop boots up in the morning, right? You can give him any device and say, log into here. Every time he logs in, his cursor's in the same place and he continues working. So there's definitely a lot of advantages to it. And this is just our little commercial to say, there's other options out there to continue to help you advance your business. Next slide. So I touched on this a little bit, right? It's really Evolve IP's problem, right? We need to make sure that the environment is secure, patched, right? Has all the latest software, things of that nature. So we provide things like, RMM, remote management and monitoring, and managed help desk services where, we can be contracted to keep your desktops up to date, from an OS and agent perspective. But the biggest thing is the data does not reside on physical devices out in the wild, right? Where they could be left on an airplane and have to worry about it, right? Now all the data is centralized, and now that it's centralized, right, the speed of that data, God forbid if there is an issue, right? The ability to restore data within the cloud is obviously going to be a lot easier than restoring to multiple remote physical desktops. But from a capability standpoint, this takes a lot of the roles and responsibilities on the security front, but it also gives you productivity back, right? We can do things overnight, right? Windows, Microsoft Tuesday comes out, right, at 10 o'clock at night when nobody's using it, right? We can make sure they're updated where somebody might leave their laptop powered off and it doesn't get the updates, right? So there's definitely a lot of advantages to what I'll call the AlwaysOn architecture, from both a security and productivity standpoint. Next slide. So Corinne.
Yeah. So shifting gears from desktop as a service back over to software as a service in the Microsoft 365 backup side. So Microsoft 365, to kind of set the stage, kind of exploded over the last couple of years. And it's because we had no choice but to adopt an infrastructure for the time. It's not like we could really be in office. We needed to find a way to continue business, to continue to collaborate, and look where we are today. We're inside of Microsoft Teams. I don't think we would have probably been, I think we probably would have been in WebEx or Zoom if this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, if I was to guess. But we're in Teams now because Teams has been such a widely adopted platform, such an expanded platform with so many different applications, just becoming a necessity to use. And we can see that with the numbers under the adoption rates here. But with that, we need to be cognizant of the need to back it up because there is a real problem with data loss. And that's where we kind of developed our 7 reasons why from. And was developed from the data protection report that we run. We run this through a third party application or a third party entity that does a survey out to the industry. So these aren't just Veeam customers, these are IT industry experts. And this is some of the data that just popped up for a second we'll take a look at. But this is the chart that we aggregated from that. And the number 1 is actually accidental deletion, which I don't know about you. I have definitely accidentally deleted stuff that I've not been able to find in the cloud environments. Definitely more than once. There's been some confusion in retention policy and gaps, depending if you're moving between the Exchange side, the SharePoint side, OneDrive, you're doing the Teams. Now we're in the Power Apps. All of these have their own independent retentions and versions that run in the background that can have some problems and some inherent gaps when it comes to being able to recover any type of data. We also have internal and external security threats. These type of threats are something that could come right in through the front door, which have no protection from Microsoft because anything that comes through the front door isn't Microsoft's problem. They protect the things that come through the side. So network security, infrastructure security, anything that replicates from site A to site B is real-time replication, meaning that anything that is altered from site A to site B is automatically replicated along those lines. You're not getting a copy, you're getting a one-to-one copy of your data in case that entire data center goes down. Legal and compliance has started to come up really in the last, I'd say year to year and a half, a lot of cybersecurity insurances have started to catch up. They realizing they don't want to pay out for these types of situations, for data loss, for reputation loss, for paying out ransomwares themselves. So they started to put in, well, multi-factor authentications requiring backups. If you read Microsoft's documentation on how to recover from ransomware, the number one thing on that sheet is actually check your backups. See if you can recover from that for the first thing. Managing hybrid deployments, there are not just the retention and compliances that you work with through the online environment, but when you're dealing with your on-prem and that migration, there's a few different ways to migrate up. You can have potential data loss, or things may not migrate the way that you intended them to, and the data might get altered. So having a backup along the way is something that you will want to consider. Teams has been huge. Teams is not a self-contained application. It's actually an abstraction layer of all of Microsoft's back-end offerings into a front-end collaborative interface. When you're working with a team, which is that Teams on the left-hand side, that's actually a SharePoint backend where you're collaboratively within these scopes on the back end of groups of people. If you do a chat, that's more like Exchange and OneDrive that you're working with on that back end. And you can keep going deeper and deeper depending on how many applications that you get into. And we'll just take a quick peek at the data that we have that backs this entire chart. And we've done this consecutive years, and you can see the SaaS admin and the backup admin are fairly in agreement on, yes, these are data protections, and we've had a similar kind of data loss because we've had some confusion. Who does this need to belong to? Who needs to recover this data? Who needs to be in charge of which administrative console? Because you can't really recover all these different kinds of data from a single location when you're working in that environment. And in some cases, you can't recover at all in certain locations. When you delete data, it's gone to the ether. And believe me, I've deleted data and spent many hours trying to get certain things back that, well, it never came back. So we have a solution to that. And on this next slide, we have Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. And this is a platform supported with Evolve IP. And we're able to protect Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams. We can protect against all of those different retention policy gaps. We have all kinds of flexible options because the real difference in the protection of the data isn't just what we're being able to protect and retain, but the ways that we can restore that data. Because there are technically things like e-discovery, but e-discovery retains to be able to export data for court cases and having metadata for those court cases and forensics. They're never meant to be really in formats to restore back to production environments. Second stage recycling bins don't have organized metadata to be able to search for files in a conducive way to restore back to production environments. You don't have those capabilities like you expect from a traditional type of backup software. Then you also have legal and compliance implications around a lot of insurance requiring you need separation in your backup to meet that compliance. Next, we'll take a look at the infrastructure. So to start off with, we'll have the Veeam server, which can do both cloud-only, hybrid, and on-premises cloud-enabled infrastructures. Port that off to S3 compatible storage and offload to low-cost object storage. Then you can do all types of restorations through our Restore Explorers. These Restore Explorers are tailored to the applications that we're restoring for. And we can see on the next slide kind of how that data is aggregated out. Each of our Restore Explorers have between them over 45 different ways to restore the data, but they're not just in raw data formats. They're in formats that make sense to the business data that we're working with. Exchange is PST files, SharePoint's lists and documents. If we're down with Teams, we're looking at message files and chats and posts. So you're restoring back the way that you expect to restore that data. In our latest version, we also offer the self-service portal, which is going to allow you to restore data without needing administrative access to the server, the backup server, the console for like the admin consoles, or anything on an administrative level, or the user's data itself, other than titles, and being able to restore that data directly back into their environment. I think we'll have a demo here. I think we have time.
Yeah, we definitely have time, but we wanted to pause and see if anyone has any questions or things that we didn't cover that you thought would be covered, or any feedback. Like I said, if you want to type in the chat. If not, Corinne was going to jump into some of the interfaces and show you some of the things in real time.
Yep, Joe and Corinne, no questions so far.
Okay.
So.
All right, Corinne, go for it.
All right. Should be good. Should be able to see the screen.
We do.
All right. So I would like to point out, just for security, since we're in a security webinar, we do use the Microsoft 365, the newest, latest Teams API, which is a protected API. This protected API allows you the most protected API exchanges from the Microsoft side. And we're able to do modern authentication without any user authentication, meaning you're using the enterprise application ID and certificate. So these two will allow you to be able to do the secure exchange without compromising. And when Microsoft deprecates their basic authentication, you'll still be able to do backups, which they're working on the deprecation as of January 30th. So any backup software that's falling behind on this, you will want to check up on that, and we're already ahead of that curve for you guys. The backup configurations allow for any type of configurations, whether you're doing static users or groups, individual sites in your entire organization. You're able to do those here. And our latest feature is going to be within this self-service portal. The self-service portal gives you access to be able to restore data without needing, again, to have the administrative account inside of Microsoft 365. So you don't need to be a SharePoint admin in order to restore your own SharePoint data if it's gone beyond the recycling bin stage, or be able to be a restore operator and be delegated roles out to other SharePoint sites without be getting rolled into those sites. So you don't have to get access to these sites. You don't have to be given administrative rights to delete anything within those sites in order to be able to perform restore operations on those sites. With this access scope, you also won't be able to export data. So you won't be able to exfiltrate data if you've given out rights. And this gives you the freedom, and we'll take a look here. Once it loads, we can see the extra site pages here. We only have the options to restore within that same original site location. Even within new locations, only allows you to do within that same site. So there is no way, even once you've delegated out restore operators, to exfiltrate data, making it easy to give like a service desk role out to your organization. And that's what we had here for you. Just a quick overview of the self-service portal.
Yep. And like I said, there Veeam just came out with a couple of new versions. So you have version 6 on the O365 side, and I believe version 12 is coming down the pike for the platform side, with a lot of new features. So I believe we're slated to upgrade within the next 30 to 60 days, And some of that includes a lot of this self-service portal. Obviously, giving the customers the control if they so want it. Obviously, we're also a managed services provider, so we provide that management as a service. But it's always nice to know that you can give a customer a portal where they can verify, select, and click around and sort of see everything. But really nice to see Veeam sort of leading the charge here on passing out that control.